One of the purposes of us being here, I think, is to help everybody here. We're all going to talk about how we're going to address the problems that are really important for us, and how we're going to, what kind of methods we're going to use. Pragmatics, we may have determined, is a pretty wide category. And so some of us are linguists, some of us are much less linguists by training. I mean, speaking for myself, but I'm very interested in language. Rukmini is a bit of everything. And that was an amazing performance. I really enjoyed it. It was fun. It was great. No, really. And the vision is very important. So you don't have anything but me talking, and I hate the sound of my own voice these days. So I had a few things written down here, and I thought about them in the middle of the night, of course, the way one does when you didn't know you had to do something, which was how to set about doing a piece of research. Let's look at qualitative methods from the point of view of how to set about doing a piece of research, which is what most of you are in the business of doing. And I put down, first of all, actually, since I knew this was going to be rather a rich brood that would precede me, which was Rukmini's, I thought I ought to be nasty about. So, but it is this. A map of the world that has no space for utopia is of no use at all. I thought that was a beautiful expression. A map of the world that had no space for utopia is of no use at all. And I thought, it came into my mind when I was listening to everybody describing their research. You were so passionate about it. In a sense, I thought, where do you begin doing a piece of research? You begin with a bit of passion. You have this vision of utopia, without which we're not going to get off the ground. And I thought that was, very important. And then the idea is, from that passion, you've got to come up with a researchable problem, and that researchable problem then has to be expressed in some kind of proposition or hypothesis, which the research will lead to. And so, you're already in deep water. It could be theoretical water, but how to get there? I mean, I spend a lot of my time, that's what most of my time, teaching time has been in the last 20 years, which is coaching students, you might say, through PhDs. Because I'm in a graduate school, and the people who come to me have various disciplinary backgrounds, but they all want to do some research in the area of language and education. And so I have to, a lot of my conference time with students is helping them to find a researchable proposition, taking this really grand vision of the utopia in this map that they want to achieve, and turning it around, turning it into something they can actually study. I actually love doing it. It's the thing I like best about it, about my job, about being a professor in a graduate school of education. I really enjoy it. I shall miss it now. I'm an emerita. But there are some hidden problems, and this was the thing. I'm sorry I'm going to put my glasses on and off. I have no choice. I have to have them to read my notes, and I have to have the distance ones. Once upon a time, I was told I could start with another anecdote. Once upon a time, I got a postdoc. It was a pre-docs. I got a fellowship to go to the United States. I was absolutely enamored of the new methods of studying, of researching within sociology. And I went to work with a man called Aaron Sickerell. And Sickerell said, you've really got to go to LA, Jenny. You've really got to go to UCLA. You've got to go to Harold Garfinkel. And you've got to listen to Garfinkel's seminars. They were in English, but I had a hard time understanding them. I could never imitate the accent. It was a New Jersey accent. Only my husband could do a takeoff of Harold. But the thing I remember is Harold had 2 pairs of glasses. And he put them on and off. I was mesmerized by those glasses. mesmerized by them. I mean, that became an image for me of this particular field, because you needed to look very close, but you needed to have a slightly wider vision that distance glasses give you. Okay, the anecdote, which I said I would put there. So I knew I worked like you people passionately. I passionately believed in the social justice causes that my research was going to lead to, that little children were going to do better in school, that the working class kids were going to have a better chance at equity in education. I was very excited about the problems. But I also, unfortunately, had to learn that in order to do this PhD, I had to put it into conventional terms. I actually referred to it as sanitizing the data. It had to be run through with statistical methods. It had to take this rich brew that I had got by doing lots and lots of interviews in a middle-class area and a working-class area of London, an area that doesn't even exist anymore. It was built over. Most of my research site was built over by the new for the Olympics. You know, it took all of that Canning Town area. The Royal Group of Docks is all gone. It was long, long ago. But this whole rich brew, where I had interviewed mothers about their attitudes to their children and their children's education, and we talked about everything under the sun. I had the most wonderful language data that I didn't know what to do with, and nobody told me. Nobody could tell me how to squeeze this lovely, rich data into narratives galore, beautiful narratives. And I think about it, I would love to have that data again. Now I'm at the end of getting to the end of my career. I think about it. I remember the day when I took all those transcripts and dumped them in a trash can because the dissertation was done. And, you know, I regret that so much. I mean, I regret that I don't have the tapes that I created of working class speech in the East End of London, which would be so different now. I actually designed a project to go back 20 years later and have a look at the same area.
I kept my tapes, you know.
And I almost got my project funded until the Ford Foundation decided to completely change the kind of thing that they were going to do. And the project woman who had promised me the money lost her job, and she actually took early retirement. I mean, it was tragic. So I never got my money to go back to the East End of London. Okay, enough about me. So the important thing, you go from your passion to your researchable problem to your proposition that you want to study or your hypothesis. And then you're faced with what's the best way to do this study? What is the best way? And that's what we think we call research methods. But I want to start by saying there's no such thing as a perfect method. I mean, sometimes students come to me and say, I want to do it this way. Remember we started talking last night about ethnography. You know, there's great passion expended around the word ethnography, what it means, can you do it in your own society, what's linguistic anthropology, ethnography, can you do ethnography, educational ethnography. There's a whole issue of something that Baron did on educational ethnography. What is it? Can you do it in the short run? Is ethnography what anthropologists used to do? Are they colonial anthropologists? Did they go and live in societies? Why was Malinowski in the Transients? Well, he got sent there because he was a foreign national and he was living in England in a very dangerous time, this First World War. I mean, I don't think he wanted to be there. But there's no such thing as a perfect method. So we have to look at a bunch of, I mean, what Rukmini has put up there, and I'm going to talk about that in 2 seconds, is almost, if you like, an origin myth. We have to have an origin myth. You have it in every corporate organization, you have an origin myth. You might say there are origin myths about linguistics, sociolinguistics. Many arguments have been gone into on what is the origin myth. Who first did it? What it first said? I mean, I get a sort of buzz when I see what did you have? Did you have Tulin down there? And you had Roman Jakobson up there? I mean, I was taught at the kitchen table or the dining room or sitting in the supper, after supper and talking about things. My husband regarded Roman Jakobson as a god. He had Jakobson stories. If you wanted to sort of cheer John up, you said, go on, tell me a Jakobson story again. When you met Jakobson, what did he say? What did you do when you went down to talk to Jakobson at the Center for Advanced Studies? Origin myths. Everyone, in a sense, within a discipline has their origin myths about that discipline. But then what I want to say just down here in the notes, and I'm going to have a look at that, is that, in fact, if there's no such thing as a perfect method, there are a whole bunch of multiple methods. We have to be these days rather quick on our feet. We can't argue and say, I am going to do an ethnography, because in fact, the input to our ethnography might be very different from the classical ethnographies. Now, I always tell my students, you've got to read. You've got to read ethnographies. You can't understand what an ethnography is unless you read ethnographies. But then again, you could read, and probably should read, and if you're in anthropology, you will read some Malinowski. You will read Malinowski's ethnographies of the Trobrians. But it is the case that the Trobrians that Malinowski looked at and wrote about aren't there anymore. Of course, you'll read some Cliff Geertz. You'll know the big name of Cliff Geertz. You'll know about sick description. You'll know about Balinese cockfights and how did he come to find out that the Balinese cockfight was the sort of central symbolic, piece of what happens, of interaction in a Balinese society. That isn't the Bali of now, absolutely chock full of Australian tourists and German tourists in the cold weather. I mean, that is not now. Just like the Trobrians that our friend Gunther Zempt writes about, is the Trobrians of now. And it's a different, is it Nico Besnier who wrote about Tonga? The Tonga of now is not the Tonga that was written about long ago. And good anthropologists are the first people to recognize how dramatically societies change and how an ethnography will understand what is there at the moment that the ethnographer is there. And the student will read this and must remember to read this as history, as classical history, part of the origin myth. That's why you always have to do the historical literature, so that you have this origin myth of how did what we understand to be ethnography came to be.
Can I ask you a simple question about ethnography?
Yes.
And my question is this, just a point for the students as much as for me.
Yeah.
I noticed that my daughter, who did anthropology, who's got a PhD in anthropology, never took records, any kind of records. She just wrote down things much like the director. And I said, well, if you don't have a record, how will we know? Even I use tapes for my disaster narratives, and I preserve them.
Yeah.
So I asked her, and she said, well, as a participant, as an observer, I'm writing down what I know. I need no record over and above which is objective. And I found that interesting because we often talk about taping versus, listening and transcribing your opinion. And I wanted to ask you, because it seems to me critical as to how you proceed when you are recording. And I've used both. And that's why I think, they're both narrative methods. But one is judged by the sociologist as more reliable because you've got a transcript, a recording, and not by anthropologists. I mean, I was shocked. I said to her, Anka, you're no corroboration, you're just taking notes, and she said, yes, that's the method of anthropology.
Yes,
and so
to learn to be yourself the participant.
Yes.
But
So
in fact, that was not traditionally, that traditionally was, of course, not the way anthropology. There's new subjective anthropology, new interpretive anthropology, is concerned with how the individual, is themselves part of this world, and often it's reflection on self. You have reflections on your field work. What is that Paul Rabineau book, guys? Rabineau's reflection on field work. What is it? Can you remember Rabineau? Has someone got a computer and look up Paul Rabineau's book? What did he call it?
I know this book.
Yeah, I mean, on his experiences, you now reflect on how you have encountered the culture, rather than being the ethnographer who creates the documentary record of that culture. That this is the shift in anthropological field work.
But supposing you didn't have tape recorders and you were still anthropologists of colonial societies and so on, you wrote down...
You wrote it all down, because that is what...
So that she wrote down. She has like huge pages of...
But her reflections...
She doesn't have a tape recorder.
No, well...
He had nothing then, to me.
Yeah, but these days, doing a linguistic analysis without the recordings...
It's not on.
No.
So that's why I thought this is a difference between the linguist and the anthropologist, who is still permitted to tell her side of the story as participant, but does not need, that very fine detail which I have on my page.
Yes, but that's the difference between the linguistic anthropologist and
the...
Yeah,
possibly. Is it the difference?
Well, the point...
Anyway, sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but it's an important methodological question.
I've only just begun.
She can take the time, no questions.
Well, we can come to the question... I don't know. Do you want me to go? I don't mind.
Yes,
I'm easy.
Just go. I interrupted. Sorry.
I'm easy.
My question.
No, it's all right. Okay. I was going to say, because I know... So the ethnography problem. Okay, I was just going to run through this little rubric. If I had some slides, I would have put it up there. And then I just we can talk about questions by looking at those slides up there. The three ethnos I wanted to have a quick look at, since I'm doing the origin myth thing. Okay, the three ethnos, which I used to run through this with my students, because they do like to know where things stand. Okay, ethnology. So ethno is the study of humankind, right? Ethno. So ethnology, that's ethno with the ology, is one thing. Okay, the other ethno is ethnography. And the third ethno, I'm sorry it's all in English, of course, and you could translate it another, ethnomethodology. And they mean three very different things, and I was going to have a quick look and then talk about how they were situated within the disciplines that are the interactional overlapping, what you call them, a Venn diagram of sociology, anthropology, and a certain kind of linguistics. So think of that Venn diagram, if I had it up there, and the bit in the middle. So where are they situated? What is ethnology? Ethnology is the detailed study, observational study of, it's ethology if it's animals, ethnology if it's people, of peoples doing things, whether they're interacting with material culture, whether they're interacting with each other, ethnology. Now, I know that Irving Goffman described himself essentially as an ethnologist. I mean, that was how he saw himself, and then he played with the idea, of course. But it's this notion of detailed observation, just plain observation. And I used to make my students do keep observational records and go and just observe silly things in everyday life. And we weren't allowed to because various reasons, we weren't allowed to go off campus. So they had to observe queues or waiting for coffee or, you know, how you go through a line. This very fundamental, how do people arrange themselves in space? There's an awful lot of study about that these days, but its beginnings is in the notion of detailed observation and records from that detailed observation. Okay. The second ethno is ethnography. You've got the observation, you write them down. But in writing them down, you are looking all the time for some critical keys to the behavior that you're observing that tell you how to go to get the essence of a culture. What is culture? But people talking and interacting with each other. How do you find its essence? What is the actual, I mean, it's almost like your metaphors. It's the key that makes things really what they are. The Balinese cockfight was one of them. You look for them. The linguistic anthropologist has a different kind of job. They have to listen because it is creating a rich context, a really rich context of human behavior, ethnology, written about and interpreted in your mind, you, the ethnographer, who in traditional ethnography is a stranger. A good book on, basic book on, American book on ethnography is Michael Agar's The Professional Stranger. You are always both in as participant in the situation, yet you can't help it. That little reflection is there. Just as when you're in a new culture, you ask yourself things about a new culture. And you're actually, it's why it's so tiring when you're in a new place. Because tourists are different, they're in tourist bubbles. But if you're not in a tourist bubble, if you're really in a new place, you have this problem of making sense of it. And that's what, in a sense, what an ethnographer does, but they are looking for these cultural keys in the ways people talk and the way they interact together that give you the sense that this is how people pass on what it means to be that kind of person. Once upon a time, in the older versions of ethnography, in the older days in anthropology, there was something called psychological anthropology. And it was fundamentally the study of child rearing. And there's a lot of I mean, one of my favorite books, I'm clearing out my books, that I've taken home, this precious volume, quite thick. Beatrice Whiting, The 6 Culture Study, comparison of child rearing in 6 very different places. Because when you are looking after your children, I mean, apart from getting them fed and stopping them bouncing up on things they're not supposed to be bouncing up on at the moment, and all the other things you're trying to do, you are giving them cultural signals the whole time in the words that you're using. Cultural signals. And the ethnographer's job in cultures was, I mean, Beatrice Whiting, who wrote 6 Culture Study, Beatrice Whiting's husband, John Whiting, was a psychological anthropologist. I think it was his dissertation. It was called Becoming a Quoma. Now, it's one of those islands, and I can't tell you which one. I read the book long ago. But it's becoming a member of that culture, a member of that society, which is actually what Levinson has been doing the last few years in his, one of the things in his institute. And then, thirdly, so I'm going to skip through the ethnos, ethnomethodology. Now, that is the mother, or rather, the image should really be male, female, the male, the father, was much more recent. In fact, there was, I think it was, when was the Purdue Symposium? Was it the 60s? That was when Harold gave his definitive account, Harold Garfinkel, his definitive account of how he came up with the word of ethnomethodology. And he said that, and I can't have the New Jersey accent, that he was going, he had a year off, he had a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard, he then went to Yale. I don't know, I had a summer fill-in job at Yale, where he said, I was going through the Yale area files. There are files in, he worked with a psychologist called Fred Strodbeck, and he did that for a summer in the University of Chicago. I think maybe he did it for more than a summer. But also in Yale, he was working briefly. And he had a look at all the different ways in which, in different cultures, people did similar activities, actions that led to similar ends. But they did them in different ways. And he thought, ordinary people have their methods. Ordinary people. And he said, what's wrong, and I always love this terminology, what's wrong with sociology is they treat the ordinary members of society as cultural dopes. Sociologists act as if they know better, and we don't. What we should be doing is observing how ordinary people do things. It was very, I mean, here I am, very new from England. Oh, I mean, I was just lapping up every word of what he was saying. And there's only one book. It's called Explorations, is it? In Ethnomethodology. It was originally published with a purple cover. We called it, at home, and with my husband, we called it the Little Purple Book. Just like we called John's Directions in Sociolinguistics, which is a bigger volume. We called it the Big Green Book. So we had the Green Book and the Purple Book. Harold's Explorations in Ethnomethodology, which were Harold's papers put together, because he found it tortuous to write, this man. He had the most brilliant ideas about how people, ordinary people in society, relied upon a different kind of knowledge than the kind of knowledge that had ever got talked about in sociology before, or in psychological anthropology. They didn't need everything spelt out. They were members of a culture, and they were willing to listen to what each other said a bit and fill in the rest. It was called ad hocing. He invented some wonderful terminology for this so that people knew what they were doing because they knew the situations they were in. They were in the same culture and they knew what the situations were. Now, the anthropologist looking in from outside had to write every detail down or record every detail. But the member within the society didn't have to. Therefore, he said the correct subject for sociology was ordinary people doing ordinary things. And in the first article in that Harold's Little Purple Book, which has been republished, was it Blackwell's republished it? Oxford? No, Blackwell's. It's been republished a couple of times and it didn't have a purple cover, and the purple fades, by the way, which is why I find it so hard to find my copy, because purple fades right out in the California sunlight, and it would do here for you. There was an example of an ordinary activity. Husband says to wife, I think she said something first, and then husband says to wife, Dana put a penny in the traffic meter today. That wife asked the husband if he got such and such a thing, and then he says, Dana put a penny in the traffic meter today. And then she says something which has nothing to do with the statement. So there are three statements which have no logical entailment at all. And the people are proceeding. They don't sort of say, oh my God, I'm dealing with a madman. They know exactly what they're doing. It's obvious he stopped at the dry cleaner. She said, did you get it? Let's say she said, did you get it? The it being, so the it has a whole bunch of understandings, but these two people know what the it is he had to pick up, was the dry cleaning. And he said, Dana put a penny in the traffic meter, and that means I stopped by the dry cleaners because that's where the traffic meters are, and I think the little thing was called Dana. The child wanted to be picked up and put a penny in the traffic meter. So these two human beings are interacting with words and are having a little conversation that to an outsider made no sense at all and to them was perfectly normal. And it relied on something more than, something quite different than Gricean implicature, which is tied very closely to the linguistics of that utterance. It was in understanding that activity as a piece of cultural doing. And this was, in a sense, the core of ethnomethodology, that we should start looking at what ordinary people do in their ordinary lives and how in many ways they make sense of that life. So, and Harold invented all kinds of ideas that you would do, his breaching experiments. He had an experiment with trust where he had completely random statements given to people who were told that they would get answers to their problems. And, you know, rather like the Wizard of Oz, they waited in the room for the answer to their problems and they heard these answers, but in fact, it was a random set of answers programmed into a computer. Yes, yeah. So, am I overstaying my, oh yes, it's time to go. It's time for supper. I mean lunch, whichever we're on. It's dark all the time here. I don't even know what time of the day it is. So, the three ethnos, I haven't got to that. Maybe we could, you won't have time this afternoon, but maybe, oh, I don't know. One of these afternoon discussions, if we have any time, we will get to how that. So, okay, because I was going to say, okay, this was one, you know, the first plank of the qualitative research methodology is to sort out what kind of study of mankind are we going to be doing, an ethnography, an ethnology, or a bit of ethnomethodology. I was going to then come and have a look at the diagram behind me and say, where does...
Well, I have one thing I should say,
yeah,
is that
it would be the other one.
This is like a very early geographer's map.
Yeah, so we have to go to the next one.
Looks like it is not
yeah.
a truth in diagrammatic form.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we should bear that in mind.
Okay, so then we shouldn't look at this.
We began pedagogically when
yeah.
we were teaching language with grammars.
Yes.
You know, phonology, morphology, whatever.
No, so we should go to the next slide.
Next one. So you want to go to the next one?
Can you make it work?
Yes, I try.
But I think we should start
because
because
that's the next one.
Yeah. So see, there we got. You know, so I was going to say that I thought I might say that we would still have to make another turn of the dice, so to speak, because we have to break apart this thing down there called sociolinguistics. We have to move conversational analysis down there, I think, too. And we have to talk about what conversation analysis is. I was a bit concerned about the conversation analysis because out of Harold's insights, he wrote a paper with, as you all know, or many of you know, with his student Harvey Sachs. And Sachs was concerned, especially since he either was a lawyer or he'd gone 1 year or 2 years through his legal training. So he was a lawyer monkey. He really, or, you know, a fledgling, he was very concerned with the wording of something. So words and their meanings were very important to him. So he was trying to convince Harold that it wasn't just this doing that became of ordinary people that was the root of what the new sociology would be, which was a new sociology which would take account of ordinary people's, the richness of ordinary people's perceptions and understandings in society, but we would have to deal with their language, what they said to each other. And what they said to each other didn't look like any of the things that, that to his knowledge, linguists looked at. It was highly imperfect, chitter-chatter, that most and incomplete sentences and things that even within Speech Act terms had no entailment within them. They were like Dana putting a penny in the traffic meter. They were statements that, not understood in the context of that piece, that significant piece of interaction, made no sense. So it gradually evolved, CA evolved into a way of studying sociologically what people did, not with a root much input from linguistics, which is, why it looks the way it does, but with the input being from creating a special kind of sociology. So it had to a certain extent, reinvent the wheel. So that's why those transcripts, the way they look, they had to reinvent the wheel.
But you could put something
anyway
into two boxes.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be only in one box.
Well, you can put conversational analysis up there and CA.
Down here, CA down there. So,
Yeah.
So the boxes are...
Yes, movable. Anyway, it is now lunchtime, so lunchtime, so I think we should end.